All right, somewhere I've got our, oh, here it is. So we've got some files to download today. I'm gonna zoom in here, hard time seeing. Where are we? Using VBA with Google Chrome. Okay, so what we're doing today or with Google Sheets, this is kind of halfway, it's like a halfway step between working with databases with VBA and like controlling Internet Explorer, not Internet Explorer, but Chrome. So that's what we're gonna do the next time we get together on Wednesday. We're gonna see how can we get VBA to just like take over control of Chrome and just control it from VBA to log into a password protected website, navigate to different places, go pull data off of that site. And so here we'll be doing something similar, but we'll be using VBA to push data into Google Sheet and then to be able to pull it back into Excel from that. So that's where we're headed. So we will need to, oh, I forgot this. The following may be helpful. A link to a Google form. What is this? Oh, this is a Google form that I made. I think we're gonna make this form from scratch for ourselves today. So I don't think we're gonna use that one for today. But let's go ahead and this is just the file that we made. I think it was not the last time, but the time before. So this is our writing to databases example where we left off. What we're going to do is we're going to say, what did we do in that example? We took all that information like from logging what the user was doing and we wrote it into a database. Well, we're going to modify that to write that to go to a Google form. And then we'll see how to pull that data back in from a Google form into a worksheet. The ability, and in fact, the efficiency with which Google will ingest data through the forms, their forms mechanism is really outstanding. It'll take data in really fast. You can imagine how many Google form submissions are happening every second around the world. I mean, they're really ramped up to be able to pull that in. And so we're just going to kind of piggyback on that. And it's going to teach us a little bit about working with HTML and also getting us prepared for what we're going to do on Wednesday. So just on a show of 0 to 5, how comfortable are you working with Google Forms, just like making Google Forms to be able to collect data from somewhere? 5, 2, 5, 5, 5, 5, 4, 5, 4. So either you're, and then a 3. So you're either really, really good at it or, and that's where I think most of us are, or you just have a little bit of exposure to it. Okay, so I'm also going to download these other two. Now, these are modules. These are Excel modules that have just been exported to a text file. So I'm going to download both of these files and we will import them into our dbwrite file here as well. So I think I've got that open already. Here it is. And we'll just come into VBA. So I've got module 1 here. That's wonderful. I think we'll probably just modify this one to work the way we want it to work. But let's go ahead and import those two other modules. One is going to have procedures built for just dynamically building a web query for us directly. So at the very beginning of the semester, we kind of saw how to build a web query, record ourselves doing a web query, and then modifying that. That was really more about recording ourselves doing something and then modifying it. So today we're going to be working with a remote internet server. And so rather than do that from scratch, we just got some procedures in a module that we're going to use. And so that's the one that's called, what's it called? Web query or something. Let's go ahead and just import that. Here's how we import a module that's been exported. By the way, if I was here on module 1 and I wanted to export that so I could give it to someone else to import, it would just be file export file. But import is right there. So let's just choose import file. And I'm going to go find that mod web query.bas. And so that now gives me this module called web query. And it really, I'm just after this procedure right here called create web query. Well, I'll give it some information and it will just dynamically build a web query, bring the information in, and then actually delete the web query object if that's what I wanted to do. And I'll also import the other one, the one that was called mod encrypt or something similar. Import mod encrypt. And so this is just going to give me two procedures that I'm interested in, one called encrypt and one called decrypt, which will just take a string of data that I want to encrypt so someone won't be able to read it, and just I can then encrypt and decrypt it here directly from VBA. Okay, so that's going to get us set up here. We have some of the groundwork to do. Any questions on getting these, getting ourselves set up and getting those imported? Yeah, go ahead.
You said you did something. You do that. I didn't pay attention when you first reported it. You said something.
I don't remember saying that. Did I say something like that? All right. So I think what I was saying is that kind of the way that I created these, like those exported files, was just by actually I wrote them in, like just in VBA here, and then I just took the module, selected the module, and said file export, and that's how those were created in the first place. We don't need to do anything with that because they're already exported. But in case you had some code that you wanted to share with someone else without sending the whole workbook, you can just send a module by exporting it. All right. So then let's go ahead and come over to Google Forms. So I'm going to come to my drive. And I think I'm just going to make a Google form right here. So new Google Forms. Got an untitled Google form. This is fantastic. And I'm going to call this the work log, because we're going to store that same information where we're just kind of keeping track of what someone's doing in Excel. We're going to be pushing it to Google Drive or to Google Form instead of putting it into a database. Oh, gee. All right. So here's the idea: is that when someone submits a Google form, they've got an HTML page that has what's called an HTML form. The whole idea behind an HTML form, a tag called form, is to say, hey, we're going to collect some data from the user, bundle it up together, and send it off to a web server to be able to accept that data and do something with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a form that someone could fill in that way, but we're not going to give that link to anyone to go fill in. We're just going to use that to simulate, to make a request to that web server that looks just as if someone had submitted that form. That's where we're headed here. So step one is going to be to make a form that will bring in the data that we need. So when we were logging users' work, I'm going to make a question kind of for each field that I want to be able to log. And so what did we have? We had a user's name. And I'll just take that as that'll be a short answer. That'll be great. And then I guess I'll make another one here. So I've got username is there, short answer. I don't remember what else we had in there, but I should be able to find it in the code because we were modifying that query. Yeah, so username, workbook name, and make a new one. What's after workbook name? Sheet name. Set name, and make sure these are coming in as, I don't want this to be multiple choice. I want these all to be short answer. We've got sheet name is short answer, target and value. Short answer and sheet name, target. The order doesn't matter, but I would like to have them in the same order and value.
The title is better as well.
What's that?
Just the title. So like, if I mean, essentially they're saying the same thing, like username or whatever, but like if there's a space between like workbook name.
Oh, is this critical? Like, do you have to have this all the same? And the answer is no. We're not going to use these names. These names are how it will kind of show in the worksheet. Data comes in, but these names are not involved in actually ingesting the data. All right, and it seems like Oh yeah, formula was the other one. So we all got to have formula. It's a little bit different here, but short answer formula. And short answer. Okay, so we got username, workbook name. And the order really doesn't matter, but I am going to put them in that same order that we had them here before. Sheet name, target value formula. That's how I like it. All right. Now, a couple of things that are kind of one configuration thing that we're going to do that isn't strictly necessary, but will make our life a little bit more clear today. Maybe starting about 3 years ago, there was a major change in the way that Google handles the form. Up until that time, like you were filling out this form and none of that information got sent to Google until you hit submit, and then it would all go together. And then about 2 or 3 years ago, they said, you know what? Some of these forms are pretty long. We should kind of save the work as they're going. And that process of kind of having it saved in different places along the way makes this a little bit more confusing for what I would need you to see today. So we're going to turn that feature off on this form. Here's how we do it. I'm going to come up here to, I'm going to come over here to settings on the form. And under presentation, there's something called disable autosave for all respondents. So I'm going to turn off. That seems so strange to have something that I turn on to turn it off, but I'm turning on the disabling of the autosave here. So we're not going to be autosaving this. Okay, so we should be able to now go and make one submission. I'm just going to go ahead and submit it so we can kind of see the process here. So I'll click on the little eyeball up here, which will let me view that form. And I will just put in some data here. Username, this is WB1, this is sheet 1. Target is A1, value is 1, formula is 2 minus 1. We'll submit that form. And then that should allow me to go and take a look at it. So I'll come over here to responses, link to sheets here, and I'll create a new sheet to put the responses in, create a new sheet, work log responses. That sounds great. And there's the one response that I have so far in this form. Okay. So now, here's what we're going to do. We are going to submit another response. Okay, so right here, we're looking at the HTML form. Now, if I ask you, like, how many of you are comfortable with different methods of communicating under the HTTP protocol, like the difference between get and post, just show me on a scale of 0 to 5. How comfortable you are with that. I'm expecting to see a lot of zeros here. I'm actually seeing more zeros than I would expect, because I know I've got some IS students in here, but they're probably not attending class much. So, okay, so when you make a request to a web server, it's not just enough to know the web server address that we're talking about. You also have to know the port, and the browser takes care of the port for you. But then there's like several different methods that you can communicate with. And the main way that you communicate with, when you just say, hey, I want to go to this web page, the method is called get. So there's a method called get that says, just get me this page. And you're usually saying, hey, I'm just bringing data down from this page. In that case, there's no body that gets sent. What gets sent is just like the URL. We send the URL off to the server, and the server says, I can use this now to figure out what you're interested in, and I will send some information to you, right? You are getting information from the server. Now, the other one that we work with all the time is called post. And post is what happens when you're sending information to the server. So when we submit this form, it's going to submit by post is the method that it's going to choose. And so when I submit something by post, I have the URL, but I also have a body of information, a document that I'm sending up to the server to be parsed. Now, it turns out we can send information to the server to be stored on the server when I'm using get, but we have to integrate that into the URL because there's no body. All the information has to be a part of the URL. And so what we're going to do is we're going to convert this form as it's just sitting here in the browser. We're going to tell it, listen, when you submit this time, when you submit, don't submit it by post, submit it by get, which will take all the information that we're putting in here and it's going to put it in the URL where we can see it. So if I'm going to push data to a server using get, I see the data as part of the URL. If I push data to the server using post, I don't get to see it. And post is the default way that Google's going to send this information. But we're going to say, hey, let me just edit this page and tell it this time to send it by get. So let's take a look. You can, and you'll need to do this along with me because there's going to be information in that URL that you're going to need to extract. Okay, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to right-click this page and choose Inspect. And so the Inspect feature for Chrome or, in fact, I think this is going to be the same for just about any browser I can think of that you might be using. So if you're using Edge, this will be, I think it'll be exactly the same on Edge. If you're on Safari on Mac, I think that'll be the same too. I'm going to say Inspect, and it's going to say, all right, well, you're probably going to want to look at, what's going on this page. And so it's showing me the HTML over here that generates this page. And as I hover over different parts of it, it kind of highlights the part. Well, right here, like this one line is what's making that whole page. That's because it can be expanded. And then I can kind of come down here and, kind of see, what am I after? Oh, that's the one that's, there. And just a few clicks in, I'm going to see this thing here called form action. This is the one I'm going to modify right here. So I'm going to undock this and make it a little bit bigger. So I just happened to find that form much easier than I expected that I would. You can always just like search Control F and search for open bracket form, and you'll find that location. So the form tag in HTML, it says, hey, we're starting with a form. Somewhere later in the page, we'll have a /form tag that will say, this is the bundle of information that we're going to send to the server. When the user hits submit, this is what we're sending. And so one interesting thing here is we can see that this is the URL that it's going to send that information to. So it's, docs.google.com. That's the same for me and you. This U, 0, DE, those are all the same for you. And then this part's different because this part beginning right here is the identifier for that form. And you've got a different, because it's going to different forms that are configured, those will all be different. And then form response is the part that says, yeah, we're sending information in. But now we'll see right here is a method, and the method is post. One of the kind of the crazy things here is that I can just change that right here. I can say, you know what, right here in this loaded in this browser, I'm going to change that to be get. So I'm going to use that alternate way to communicate with the server that will say, instead of sending a hidden body with all the information, put this information in the URL where I can see it. So that's all I did was change post to get right there. And now I'm going to make another submission of my form. Now this one, I'm going to want to make sure that in fact, I'm going to write exactly the same thing. I'm just going to put the label in for the submission because I'm going to need to be very clear about which, because I'm going to see several pieces of information coming in. I want to be able to know how they're named. And so I'm just going to put the title in for the submission for each one. Okay, oh, thank you. That would have been very confusing to me. Did I get the rest of them right? It's like it. Okay, so this time when I submit it, the information that I'm submitting will show up in the URL. So I'm going to submit it, and then I'm going to copy that URL because I want to be able to keep that around, but I've got to extract some information out of it. So I'm going to hit submit. And then I'm going to copy this whole URL. I'm going to bring it up in Notepad. And let me format word wrap. Okay, so here's that same URL that we saw when we looked at the form. The lead up that's the same, my unique identifier for my form, and then form response. And then when you see a question mark in the URL, it says, hey, everything after that question mark, these are parameters that I'm sending to whatever script is going to be processing this on the server side. And now what we see is a series of values that are separated by the ampersand. So every ampersand here is saying, hey, the question mark says, hey, we're going to have a name value pair. Here's the name, entry dot something equals, and then here's the value that I sent in. And then here's the next one. So I'm just going to kind of break these onto separate lines. There's not that many of them. Oops. So I'm going to bring that down. This one that has the ampersand, I'll get rid of the ampersand and bring it down. And this will be a lot easier to look at if I just replace those ampersands with the enter character. And then the rest of these, FVV equals 1, partial response is null. That's that kind of that automatic saving that we're talking about. I'm not sure what else is here. Page history. Truth is, I don't think we need the rest of these at all. In fact, I may just play with that for just a second. So I'm going to bring a pristine copy of this back into my little worksheet here. And I'm just going to see if my hunch is that everything after my last form entry here, formula, that I don't need these at all. I'm just going to delete those. You don't need to do this. This is just me checking to make sure this works the way I think it should work. I'm going to copy that URL and paste it into a new browser. So right now I've got these two submissions here. I'm just going to paste that URL that I've modified. I've kind of chopped it off after my last input field. I just want to make sure that that does bring in, like without those other ones, I don't know what those things are doing, but they're not necessary to get the data into my worksheet, which is what I'm after. So we can see that that came in just fine. That looks great. Okay, so what that means is that I need to build this URL. And once I've built that, I can just make a request to that web server in some way that in kind of any way that I could do that from VBA. And there are several ways I could do it. And it will push that information into the form. So don't need to work with a form at all. I can just make the call directly to the server. But what I've got to do is I've got to build this like it's going to be like that's going to be the same. Well, yours will be different because you've got a different ID. But I'm guessing that your entries are different here, right? Your entry is not numbered the same as mine. Am I right about that? Yeah, so I don't know how they generate those numbers or what those numbers mean, but they're fixed for this form. So this form username always comes in through this is like the name of the field that uses to ingest the data. So I'm going to copy this. Like, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to copy the URL. Everything before the and FVV, and I'm going to bring that over here into VBA, and I'm ready to start working with it. Okay, so I'm on module 1, and I'm going to take this record edit. Maybe I'll start off just by pasting that URL in as a comment. I'm going to need it here, so I'll just bring it as a comment for now. Why don't we do this? I'm going to copy record edit. So instead of just blowing it away, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to name this one record edit DB. So this is the database version of it. But we're going to modify the other copy of this to work with Google Sheets instead of with the database. So are we ready to start editing, or do we need a minute to kind of still get set up? Anyone saying, hold on just a second? Okay. So this is still going to be passing in the sheet and the target. That's great, but I don't need the database connection. I don't need the connection string. I don't need SQL. I'll leave this one in place. This is just says if I'm editing more than one cell, we're not going to be logging it. So all this connection stuff we don't need. SQL we don't need, but let's do this. Let me dim URL. As a string. And this will be similar to our SQL. So instead of SQL, I'll change this to URL. And we'll make that equal to our URL. And that is much longer than I want. So I think I'm going to leave this first. Yeah, I'll do this. I'll close these. That gets me up to the question mark. I'm going to have the question mark be the first part. And then my next line, I'm just going to say URL equals URL concatenated with this. So I'm just kind of breaking this onto multiple lines so that I can see it better in my code and work with it. No space there. Do another one here. I'll break it here. So now I can kind of see that whole URL on my screen at once. It wouldn't hurt to leave it all as one long string, and that's probably how I would do it if I were just doing it myself. But because I want you to be able to see all of everything I'm working on, I've split that line up so that it can all show on the screen. Now, similar to how we had the SQL kind of pre-written with some parameters that we're going to replace, we're going to do the same thing here. So actually, how I wish I would have wrote those in uppercase, because then I could just wrap some tags around it. So I'm going to take username and I'm going to replace it with the tag that I'll then replace. Same thing with workbook name. Sheet name. Target value and formula. Now we had to treat formula specifically for SQL, but there's no reason for us to do that here in this worksheet, or in this Google form. So I'm going to go ahead and bring formula in line with the rest of them. We'll have to modify these. Get rid of this conditional block here. And now I think I'll maybe just do a find and replace here. I'm going to convert SQL to URL, and we'll be pretty close to what we need here. So Control H, we'll do a find and replace. In the selected text, I'm looking for SQL. I'm going to replace it with URL. Place all. Okay, so URL is going to be what it used to be, replacing this with something else here. Now I have this thing called prep URL here. Oh, we had prep SQL and we changed it to prep URL. I guess that's all right. Let's go ahead and come down to and make a prep URL now as well. We need a function called prep URL. And we're going to send some text into it as a string. I'm just going to return a string. And let me dim temp as a string. We'll kind of use this variable temp to kind of work on this as we need to. There'll be a couple things we'll want to do to this string. Okay, the first thing to realize is that there are certain characters that are reserved that have meaning in a URL. So can you imagine what would happen if I was trying to submit? I've lost my browser. Here we go. If I was trying to submit a response here that had an ampersand, what if I said, username is Ben and Jerry? That ampersand has meaning inside the URL, right? It says we're segmenting the data that we're sending. And so what has to happen here is that, and the web browser does this automatically, is it says, oh, like when I'm going to send this, I've got to convert that into a different version of itself. Let me just show you what it does. I'm going to change this so we can see the data again. You don't need to do this again as well, but let me just hit inspect here and look for the form. Look for the form, change it to be get instead of post. Form action. Interesting. I wonder if that's the second form. There's more than one form here. One match, one of one. I'm kind of expecting that to see post here. I don't see it. Am I just missing it? Action, form response, target. Oh, maybe it's scrolled off. Oh, here it is, just off the side. Yeah. Okay, so now when let's see, let's do that. I'll also put a space in. I'll take, so we'll look at the space, look at the ampersand. I guess that'll be enough. You'll get the feeling. I'm going to copy that URL so we can see what it did. Okay, so here's the sheet name entry. So username was my first one, right? Form response, formula. I could put them in a different order that I'm expecting them. Sheet name. Do you see my username up here? Oh, here it is, Ben and Jerry. Okay. So it converted that ampersand to %26. Why %26? So we've looked a little bit at the ASCII table. We looked at the ASCII table a couple of times in this class. Uh-oh, I'm not sure that was the best one to choose. Open image in a new tab. All right, every character has a numeric representation. So if I look for the ampersand character here, here it is, right here. So that's character number 38 in base 10, but in hexadecimal or base 16, that is 26. So base 16 is nice because I can express all of this first set of characters using just 2 digits. And so it's using that 26 as a representation for the ampersand. So it's saying, %26, it goes, oh, that's an ampersand. And then I put a space on this one. And it converts a space into a plus. It just says, you know what? If you've got a space, space is not allowed, we'll use plus instead. What if you wanted to put a plus? What would it do? Well, whatever plus is, would change it to %2b, because plus is reserved to mean space. So it's kind of a complex scheme, but so we're gonna have to convert these things. Well, fortunately, there's a function that will do that for us. Not built into VBA, because VBA was written before Microsoft had any notion that the internet was going to be important. And so, but we've got that. So what we want to do is say, hey, listen, if there's something that needs to be encoded to go into this URL, we need to encode it. So let's go see how to do that. Let me view my project browser. What is it called? Project Explorer. Okay, so here in mod web query, so this web query module, if we scroll down to the bottom of this one, we'll see that I have plugged in here a function called URL encode. I did not write this. I Googled this and found it and looked at it and went, that looks pretty good. But we can see that it's going to be doing stuff with like the hexadecimal representation of the character code. And so it's building these up. I'm not sure if this one, yeah, if space as plus, then yeah, because you can encode a space either as a plus or you can encode it as %20. So looks like that's just a setting here, space as plus. By default, that's false. So I think it's going to probably tend to want to encode our spaces as %20 instead of plus. That's okay. We don't really have to understand this, but it's going to use URL encode. So down here where we're doing our prep URL, we're going to say temp equals URL encode of text. And then we may do something else to it, and ultimately we're going to return temp. So I will set the name of the function equal to temp to return that value. So now if I was just to call this prep URL and just sending something that doesn't need to be encoded, like something that's just characters, my first name. But if we put a space in that, then that will get encoded as %20. Prep URL. Yeah, and we're not, you know, we could change it down here on the encode to encode that as a plus, but %20 will work just fine. If I had something else that needed to be encoded in here, like a plus or a %sign, then that would all get encoded properly. So that's set up so that the URL, we can plug that information in the URL and it won't confuse the web server. The web server will take those values, unencode them, plug them into our database or plug them into our sheet properly. Okay, we've covered some new things here, like post versus get, and now this encoding and URLs. Show me how you're feeling about coming along with what we've done so far. 2, 5, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. Okay. So yeah, let's kind of push forward and then we'll have some time for questions. If you have questions now, and the problem that whenever I was a 1 or a 2 as a student, trouble was I didn't quite know the question to ask to kind of get myself up. But does anyone have questions they want to ask at this point? Or yeah, go ahead. What if I wanted to write %29? Like if I wanted to have that in my string? So the 29 is okay. The % is not okay. And so % will get converted into, well, I guess we'll see it here. So the 29 is there. So the 29 is there. So % is character number 25. And so it says %25, which is a %. 29. So this, when this gets unencoded, that part gets put back to a % and it rebuilds it that way. Yeah, it's kind of abstract to deal with. Yeah. Oh, that's right. So the question is, hey, sometimes when you're making a password, there's some characters that are disallowed. You're not allowed to put a % into your password. And the answer is yes, it may not specifically be for URL encoding, but there's some other meaning to those characters that they're saying, don't put that in the password because we're counting on that to mean something that we're wrapping around your password. Yeah, what was it? One of the early systems that I built didn't handle that very well. And it seems like the equal sign, I let people put equal signs in their passwords. And when someone actually did put an equal sign in their password, all heck broke loose because I was assuming that equal meant something else in it. Yeah. All right. So now when we are, see if I can go back to where I was here. Module 1. Okay, so now our URL, we're replacing all these values with whatever we're passing in, but we're encoding it. So if the application username has something that has to be encoded, prep URL is just going to encode that for us. So let's print URL. And we are not executing anything here. We'll have to see how do we actually send it, but at this point, we should be able to see it. Oh, this should be target.formula. Thank you. So yeah, I've got to read the formula off, and that's what I'm encoding. The formula is going to start with an equal sign, so it's going to get encoded. All right, so I should be able to, this should get triggered like just by editing that form or changing on my page. So let's go ahead and make some changes here. And I'll put a formula. This is just going to equal 1 + 1. Okay, so I should have cleared that out. I'm not quite sure where it printed that. I'll do that again. Equals 1 + 1. Well, I guess that'll be okay too. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to copy this out and take it to Notepad just so we can cut it apart a bit. Okay, so here's where my entries are. And the ampersand. I must have said %20. I'm not sure why I lost it. Get rid of this ampersand. This ampersand. So it looks like I did not copy the one that I thought I copied. So let's try it again. Equals 1 + 1. Equals 1 + 1. Okay, there's only one there now, so that's got to be the right one. Okay, so there's the first question mark. I'm not sure why that's breaking there. %20 is, oh, it's just because that's where it's wrapping. I'm just curious as to why that's going on to the next line, where the percent went. I don't know. Equals dB right. Okay. Okay, so it encoded the space in my name. It looks like there was nothing that needed to be encoded here. Sheet 1 is just fine. $G$4 just fine. The result of the formula is 2, but here is equal sign. Is 3D an equal sign? It's got to be. Equal sign is that the equal sign? I can't even tell. Equals 1 + 1. So %2b. So 2b should be the plus. There's 2b. And it says 3d should be equal. Oh yeah, there it is. 3d is the equal sign. So we can see that that's encoded. So it looks like we now have a well-formed URL. We should be able to just now send that to the web server. Remember, that's what a web query does. A web query just says, here's a URL. I want to ask a web server for that information. Now, normally we're interested in bringing the data back from the URL. In this case, we just want to make the request. We don't really care what comes back. So let's go ahead and just do that. Again, mod web query has this thing called create web query. So I'm just going to make a call to create web query. I'll print the URL. I'll say create web query. And destination is a range where I want to put the results of the query. So I need to know some, I'm going to put it, maybe I'll just make a sheet called web query Query. And so the first thing here is a range. So that's going to be sheets. We've got a sheet called web query. And it's going to be the first cell there. So range A1. The second thing is a URL. The next thing is, what do I want this to come back as? The entire page is fine. So I'll choose Excel entire page. And the next one is save query. Oh, and it looks like that is coming as a default. So I don't think I need everything past URL. The defaults will be fine for everything past URL. So I'm giving it a cell to put the results in, a URL to make the request for. The rest of the defaults will be fine for me. And that should push that data now into my Google Sheet. You just go ahead and bring my Excel workbook up. Oh, I just realized that's going to change. You got to be careful here because that's going to change that sheet web query. And what will that trigger? It'll trigger a change. Yeah, it'll say, oh, make this change, make this change. Yeah, that might get out of control. Hope you haven't run it yet. Did anyone run it? What did it do?
Well, it just like came back with log responsibilities.
And it didn't like, no, that's right. That's what we expect to see. But go look at your form. Is your form like, because that could be like happening so fast you don't see it refreshing. You could have thousands of responses by now. Just one. Okay, good. Okay, so based on that answer, I'm not going to try to put something so I thought that might happen. It sounds like it didn't happen. So, oh, it's probably because it's changing more than one cell when it changes. So that's why we're ignoring changes with more than one cell. So yeah, let's just go ahead and see it happen. So I'm going to open up my Google form so I can see the response come in. I'll come to sheet 1 and I'll type something in. We can see it then going in right there, equals 6. Response goes in. You look great. So, not too bad. So once we've got our URL formatted, it's just a matter of calling the web query. And you're right, it's just going to bring back a page that says just the same thing that it said on, like when you go to that page, do you want to submit another one? Your response has been recorded, submit another request. Don't ever put a password through, wait, does it say that? Somewhere it used to say that. Anyway, Google Forms. Neither endorsed, this is neither endorsed or created by Google. Okay, questions to this point? So let's see what it takes to pull that data back. Now, there is an API for Google Sheets. So we could actually, like Google Sheets is set up to be able to accept a request from some other computer system like VBA and pull that information back. But we're going to take a much simpler approach to getting this data. All we're going to do is we're just going to publish this data. So I've got my form response here. I'm going to choose File and Share, Publish to Web. And so let's see, Publish to Web, link, embed, that's fine. Entire document. I don't want the entire document. I just want my form responses. And so I'll choose Publish. Are you sure you want to publish it? Sure. So this link now is just a link that will bring that data back as a web page. right? Again, this thing is like custom made for, well, not custom made, but this thing is ready to work with a web query. So I'm just going to use that to bring my data back into my code. I'll make another function here, another sub procedure called get data. And I'll just put this on the web query as well. So in fact, I'll just bring down the same statement for creating a web query, but the URL is going to be that URL that I copied. Maybe I'll put it into a variable just so it looks a little nicer here. Const URL equals that. Well, that's the published URL. So running get data should bring that data onto this sheet. And as I make changes, I could do something that would enter a new one here. I'll then have to run get data again. And it publishes it only like every 5 minutes. So I'm not sure that I'm going to have that. What did I just add? I added SADFG. Yeah, and that's not showing up yet. So it'll be within 5 minutes or so, that will be available for it to be able to come down. So we do have that little bit of a lag just in terms of how fast Google updates that source. Now, are we ready for more? We need to let this settle in for just a minute. Is there any questions? Oops. So there's the get data. The problem with this is that anyone who gets a hold of this URL has access to that data, right? That's, it's just there. So if what I'm doing is not that sensitive, I might be okay just like that. But if I'm thinking, you know what, I got to make sure that no one else gets access to this data, it is sensitive. What are we going to do? And the answer is that's why we have that mod encrypt function. Let's take a look at that. Here's the idea behind encrypting data. So I'm going to call, there's a function called encrypt inside of mod encrypt. I'm going to give it the string that I want to encrypt. See if I can remember something I learned from conference. I'm supposed to testify more of the divinity of the Savior. So Jesus is the Lord, or is the Christ. I guess that's a message I don't really want to encrypt. I want everyone to read that message, but suppose I wanted to encrypt that message. I then give it some key, could be a random string of characters that I'm going to use that the encrypting function will use to say, all right, we are going to take this string, run an algorithm based on this key, and render that as something different. And that's what it then comes back as. So that's that same value encrypted. I can decrypt that. But to be able to decrypt it, I have to give it the same key that was used to encrypt it. And so it'll decrypt it back. So someone who sees this would have no idea what it says unless they have the key. This is called private key encryption, private key symmetric encryption, and it is really secure. It's inconvenient because if you're trying to pass this message to someone, you've got to have some way to get them the key because they need the same key that you used to encrypt it, to decrypt it. But we don't. That key just needs to live right here as part of this program. This will work really well. So all I'm going to do is that before I encode it, before I encode the data I'm putting in the URL, I'm just going to encrypt it. So temp equals encrypt text with, and I guess I'll just use this key. The key doesn't matter as long as you use it, the same wherever you use it. So in fact, maybe I'll make that a constant up here for my module. So now when I encrypt it, I'm just going to use that key. And now when I encode, I don't want to encode text, I want to encode temp, because now temp is the encrypted version of my text. And so I need to encode that encrypted version. So now when I write this data to the sheet, it's going to be encrypted. Got a little problem because I've got some unencrypted data on my form now, and I've got some encrypted data. So I'll probably want to go and delete everything that's unencrypted. There's a question in the back.
Yeah, I was just wondering if I could see the const.
Oh yeah, the const declaration. Just const, you give it a name just like a variable, but the difference is you set it equal to whatever you want to straight away on that same line. And of course, the constant is like a variable, exactly the same thing, a named location in memory, just you can't change it once it's got its value. So now if I was to make some change here, and then go look at my form, we've got all that information now in here encrypted. Interesting that target didn't get encrypted. Everything else did. So I must have missed something about target. Oh yeah, it doesn't have prep URL around it. I guess it's because it didn't have prep SQL around it in the prior version. Like the rest of them have prep URL. So now that's encrypted. I'm going to just republish this. That will cause that to, I don't have to republish. I could wait 5 minutes. But if I come to share and, oops, it'll force it to republish it if I just share it again. Publish to web. Response. I think there's a way to stop publishing. How do I tell it to stop publishing? Automatically republish when changes are made. I've just forgotten how to unpublish it. Does anyone see how to unpublish it? Oh, stop publishing. There's a button. You said that, didn't you? Yeah. Stop publishing. Okay. Publish. Okay. So now if I come back and run get data again, it should get the encrypted data. So now it would just be a matter of once we brought that data in, to go through and run the decrypt algorithm on each one of those cells to be able to decrypt it, which we have time to do. Or we could call it good for the day. Let's just talk about what would it take, what would the code look like to go through. We're not going to, the timestamp won't be encoded because we don't put the timestamp in, but every other column would be. So it would just be a loop that says, hey, start here looking at column Oh, interesting. Column A is hidden. Why is column A hidden? I don't remember hiding column A. Unhide. There we go. Just made that sheet. I'm not quite sure how that got hidden, but it's hidden. The web query must do the hiding on it. Anyway, that then we just make a loop that goes through all these rows and then looks across all those, each inside that loop would look across all those columns and would just replace the value there with whatever the result of the decryption was. So I'm inclined not to spend the time in class to do that, but I will dismiss class. And then if you have questions, we can look at it separately. Anything before we dismiss? Okay. If you're one of those folks that was like a 2 on this and you're thinking, oh boy, I'm in trouble for this. This is not going to appear. There's no project that deals with this. It's not going to appear on the final exam. So yeah, hey, why don't you tell us that before we came to class today, Al? But the stuff we cover on Wednesday is going to be the basis of our last project. So that's it then. Thanks for coming. Class dismissed. Yeah. How did I get the key? I just made it up. I let my fingers do the typing without thinking. Here, put it here so I can see it better. We have a sheet called web query.
Just trying to do